Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're focusing in, taking just one specific piece of gear, and it's a big one. Gloriously oversized, you might say?
Oh, yeah. A yellow brick of modulation.
Exactly. And we're going to look at why it became, well, such a legend. This isn't just some simple pedal. It's really a monument to pro-level analog design from, the late 70s, early 80s?
That's the one. We're talking about the MXR M134 stereo chorus.
The M134.
Yeah. And for this deep dive, we've got, the original manual info, some history on the circuit, lots of user feedback too. So the mission, really, for you listening, is to get past just the cool vintage vibe.
Right.
And understand how this thing actually solves some problems that earlier modulation effects had. And what those design choices, like the 18-volt power in that EQ section, really do for the sound.
Okay, let's unpack that. The M134, if you know your gear history, picture it immediately, right? That big yellow die-cast box. That whole look was kind of the MXR signature for their, professional modulation pedals back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Its identity is pretty clear. MXR's big box, analog stereo chorus. And the sources mostly agree. Production was mainly late 70s through early 80s. Think roughly 1979 to about 1984.
And the thing that really sets it apart right away, the thing that screams Pro Tool, those true stereo outputs.
Totally.
It wasn't just meant for, plugging into one amp. It was designed with studios, maybe wet dry rigs in mind.
Yeah.
Built to spread that sound out.
Absolutely. That was a key feature. And, that huge enclosure wasn't just for show. It needed space for the quality components, the dual outputs, and also because of its pretty hefty power needs.
Ah, yes, the famous 18 volts. We'll get there. But first, maybe walk us through the standard controls. What actually makes the chorus happen?
Okay, yeah, let's start with the basics from the manual. You've got your three main chorus knobs. First is rate.
Right, that's the speed control. Sets how fast the LFO, the low-frequency oscillator, is running, how fast the pitch wobbles.
Exactly. And the range is pretty wide on this one, 0.1 hertz, so super slow, up to 10 hertz. Pretty quick shimmer.
Okay, then
you have width. That controls the depth.
Yeah.
How wide the pitch swing is.
Makes sense. Deeper chorus effect.
And finally, intensity. That's basically your mix control. Blends your dry guitar sound with the modulated wet sound.
So far, so standard for a chorus.
Pretty much. But like we said, the M134 was built to fix a couple of key issues that smaller, simpler analog choruses often had back then.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. Problem number one. That low-end mushiness you sometimes get.
Exactly. You run a really deep chorus on a bass guitar, or even just a guitar tuned down low, and the low notes start to sound, wobbly, kind of indistinct. Users call it low-end seasickness.
Yeah, I know that sound. Not always pleasant. So how did the M134 tackle that?
With a really elegant solution, the bass filter switch. Flick that switch, and it cuts the chorus effect only on the low frequencies, your fundamental bass notes. They stay dry, solid.
Oh, that's clever. So the low end stays tight, no wobble, but you still get the shimmer on the mids and highs?
Precisely. That's, professional thinking right there in a pedal format.
Okay, clever trick number one. What's the second big feature?
The dedicated EQ section. And this isn't just like a simple tone knob that rolls off highs. This gives you real control over the modulated sound itself.
Ah, okay, so not EQing the whole signal, just the effect part.
Exactly right. You get separate bass and treble knobs, specifically shaping the tone of the wet signal. And the specs show they offer serious power, plus or minus 12 dB of boost or cut.
12 dB? That's a lot. And where are those frequencies centered?
That's key. The bass knob is centered at 100 hertz. And the treble is at 3 kilohertz.
Okay, 100 hertz. That's hitting the sort of fundamental body of the guitar sound, right? Not the super low mud, but the thickness?
Exactly. You can add some girth to the effect there. And 3 kilohertz for the treble. That's right in the presence and clarity range.
So you could boost that 3K to make the chorus really glassy and bright, like for those classic 80s clean tones.
Totally. Or you could cut it back, make the chorus darker, maybe a bit more subtle, sit back in the mix more. Just having that level of control over the effects tone was, pretty unusual for a pedal back then.
It really does sound like a studio tool squeezed into a pedal. Before we dive into the guts, the electronics, let's talk about identifying these things. You mentioned the production window. Any quirks there?
Yeah, one really interesting one is how they evolved even within that short run. The sources are pretty clear that the very first units, say from 79 up to about 1982, they didn't have an LED indicator at all.
No LED. Wow. So you just stepped on it and hoped it was on.
Pretty much, or listen carefully. It wasn't until the later pedals, roughly 82 to 84, that they added the standard red LED to show if it was active.
Huh. So that's a big visual difference for collectors, right? Pre-LED versus post-LED.
Definitely a key detail to look for.
Okay, so let's talk engine. This level of control, the stereo outs, the build, it must have some serious stuff going on inside. What do the tech specs tell us?
Yeah, this is where it really shines and earns that pro reputation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's built tough, obviously, but the specs themselves are clean. The maximum delay time for the chorus modulation is 16 milliseconds.
Okay.
Frequency response is super wide, 20 hertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz, and flat within plus or minus 1 dB.
That is studio grade.
And the total harmonic distortion, the THD, is really low, less than 0.1%, which is pretty remarkable for an analog pedal of that era.
Wait a sec. If the distortion is that low, how does it still get that, warm analog character everyone loves? Doesn't low THD usually mean more like digital clarity?
Ah, good question. The answer lies partly in the power, which we'll get to, but also the internal design. See, analog delay inherently adds some noise. To combat that without sterilizing the sound, MXR put in a noise reduction system. It's often described as a kind of 2-to-1 compander or comp-gating setup.
Okay, so it cleans things up after the delay happens.
Sort of, yeah. It helps keep the overall signal clean, which contributes to that low THD figure, while still letting the BBD chip do its analog thing. And speaking of bypass, it's worth noting this is buffered bypass, not true bypass.
Right, standard for the time. But the real key to the clarity, and maybe the warmth too, is that power structure, isn't it?
Absolutely. The current draw is listed as 26 milliamps, which isn't huge by modern standards, but the voltage. It needs 2 9-volt batteries run in series or an 18-volt DC adapter.
18 volts. That's double the standard pedal voltage.
And that 18-volt operation is pretty much the thing people talk about. It's directly linked to its reputation for having giant headroom.
Explain headroom in this context. Why does 18 volts matter so much?
While running at a higher voltage gives all the internal components, especially the op amps and the BBB chip, much more space, electronically speaking. It means the input signal can be a lot hotter, maybe from active pickups or putting a boost or overdrive before it without the pedal's input stage clipping or squashing the signal before it even gets chorused.
Ah, okay. So it can handle a stronger professional level signal without distorting on the way in. And that lets the actual chorus effect, the BBD part, work more cleanly.
Precisely. That massive headroom lets those BBD chips operate in their sweet spot, giving you clarity and the analog character.
Okay, let's talk about those BBDs then, the heart of the analog sound. What are they?
Right, the Bucket Brigade device, or BBD chip, that's the core technology. For anyone less familiar, you can kind of picture a BBD like a tiny electronic conveyor belt, a line of miniature capacitors or buckets. The audio signal gets passed along this line, bucket to bucket. The speed that the buckets move is controlled by the LFO. That's your rate knob again.
Okay.
And that whole process, passing the signal along these stages, inherently creates a slight delay and introduces that warm, sometimes slightly grainy, characteristic analog sound. That's what gives the M134 its signature tone.
And do we know which specific BBD chip was used? Does that matter?
It does. The sources mostly point to the Panasonic MN3008. That was a well-regarded, high-quality 8-pin BBD chip used in quite a few classic pedals from that era.
The MM3008.
However, some user reports, maybe forum posts or articles digging into specific units, also mention the possibility of a Redicon chip being used sometimes.
Redicon. So maybe not always the Panasonic. What's the deal with that? Does it make a difference?
Well, it suggests there might have been some variability, maybe based on component availability back then, which wasn't always consistent in the late 70s, early 80s. The MN3008 seems to be the standard, the most common one found.
Right.
But if some units did use a specific Redicon chip instead, it could potentially lead to subtle differences, maybe a slightly different noise floor or a slightly different texture to the modulation. It's the kind of thing collectors might get really interested in.
Chasing those specific chip variants.
Exactly. But either way, whether it's the MN3008 or a Redicon equivalent, we're talking about premium analog delay chips for the time. And when you combine that quality BBD with the 18-volt power,
you get that sound everyone describes as rich and lush analog chorus.
that's the description you hear over and over. Rich, lush, and wide.
And that width, Let's circle back to the stereo outputs. That's where the lushness really comes alive, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Users consistently report that the M134 gives you a really noticeable stereo spread. When you run it properly in stereo, maybe dry signal to one amp, wet signal to another, or panned in a mix.
Yeah.
That phase difference between the dry and the modulated signal creates this incredible spatial feeling. It just sounds fundamentally bigger, wider, more three-dimensional than pretty much any monochorus pedal from back then.
And the headroom helps there too, right? Because the signal isn't getting squashed. The modulation sounds really clean and, well, huge.
Definitely. It all works together, but it is vintage analog tech. We have to mention the potential downside.
Ah, the noise floor.
Yeah. Despite that internal noise reduction we mentioned, you still see forum users reporting that some units, maybe especially the earlier ones, or if you really push them hard with a high-gain pedal beforehand, they can be a bit noisy. Some audible hiss.
The classic analog trade-off.
It really is. You get that massive, pure analog tone. But sometimes you get a bit of hiss along with it. It's kind of part of the character, part of the package that people who seek out vintage gear often just accept or even embrace.
Right. And if you are hunting for one of these vintage beasts, the sources show just how detailed collectors get. They literally track specific units using date codes on the potentiometers, the knobs inside.
Yeah, the pot codes. Like you might see a code stamped on there like 1377937.
And that means
137 is the manufacturer code for CTS, a common pot maker. Then 79 is the year, 79, and 57 is the week. So that pot was made in the 37th week of 1979. It helps date the pedal's assembly quite accurately.
Wow. It's like a little time capsule built into the circuit.
It really is. And that level of detail just shows how much people still value these originals. And remember, the big visual cue between those vintage runs is that LED, or lack thereof. Pre-LED means it's one of the very earliest ones.
Now, for people who love that sound but maybe don't want the hassle of vintage electronics or finding an 18V power supply, we should mention the modern reissue, right? Dunlop MXR still makes an M134.
Correct. There was a modern reissue. And it keeps the core control set. Rate, width, intensity, that crucial bass treble EQ, and the bass filter switch. All the key sound shaping tools are there.
But updated for convenience.
Yeah, brings in the modern stuff like a standard 9-volt power jack, much easier to integrate onto a modern pedal board, and of course it has the status LED.
So let's try and synthesize this. What are the absolute key takeaways? What makes the M134 such a classic, still sought after today?
I think it really boils down to a kind of perfect storm, a trifecta of really smart professional design choices for its time.
Okay, trifecta. Number one.
First, the foundation. Quality analog BBD architecture. Using chips like the MN3008 for that core warm delay sound.
Right, number two.
Second, that unique and really powerful control set. Specifically, the surgical bass and treble EQ for the wet signal, and that clever bass filter switch to keep the low end tight. That level of control was ahead of its time.
Makes sense.
And number three, and third, underpinning it all, the massive headroom provided by running it internally at 18 volts. That allowed for clarity and the ability to handle hot signals like no other chorus pedal really could back then.
And that combination, BBDs, advanced controls, high voltage, resulted in its signature sound. That incredibly wide, lush stereo spread modulation. It sets a new benchmark, really.
It really did. Which brings us back to an interesting point, the kind of tension we touched on based on the source material.
Yeah. And this leads us to our final thought, something for you to mull over.
Exactly. So think about this. We've established that the M134's famous giant headroom, and maybe even some aspects of its specific analog character and noise profile, are directly tied to that 18-volt power supply, and those specific, now long out-of-production BBD chips like the MN3008.
Right, the original recipe.
So if a modern reissue is understandably built for convenience, using readily available parts, maybe different BBDs or even a digital emulation, and crucially, running on standard 9-volt power, what inherent sonic compromises might it have to make?
Can you truly replicate that vintage sound and feel, especially how it reacts when you push it with a hot signal, without that original high voltage architecture? Is that 18-volt requirement fundamentally inseparable from the vintage M134 tone?
Something to think about next time you plug in a chorus pedal, maybe, whether it's a modern convenience or a genuine vintage beast.
Absolutely. A great place to leave it. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the MXR M134 stereo chorus.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.